Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jo Flick with the Montana State Library. I'm going to be facilitating today, and just an update, Jennie was called out to a meeting and is not going to be able to be with us. I believe this is the first time we've had a website chat without our state librarian. So we have plenty of things to talk about today, so don't go away. And she does send her apologies, and she might join us in a few minutes. So just a reminder that I do record all of these website chats and post them to the Montana State Library's Vimeo channel. You can easily find the link to this if you go to the events calendar in Aspen and find any website chat, and the video link will be right in there. They're all put in one single showcase. They used to call these albums in Vimeo, but now they call them showcases. So they're easy to find, and I usually keep the most recent 2 or 3 up and available. These are all very newsy kinds of training events, so we don't want you to be spending time watching a 6-month-old one that won't be very much use to you at all. And let's see, what else should I tell you? So I usually get those recordings up within a couple of hours of the event. So feel free anytime that you can't make the website chat to check in within a day or two, or late afternoon after the chat, and you'll find them on the Vimeo channel to review. And a couple of things about training. We have one more introductory census webinar planned for December 10th. We had one earlier this week, same content and information that we covered. I've hooked up with a couple of the representatives from the U.S. Census Bureau. Jennie sits on a task force, a statewide task force, and that's part of the state of Montana's Center for, let's see, I got to get this right, Census and Economic Information Center, and that's part of the Department of Commerce. And so we'll have some of those representatives online for this next meeting on December 10th as well. And you're welcome to come and listen in, learn a little bit about what to expect with the 2020 census. We're expecting libraries to be very busy, and we'll explain why, what you need to know about that, some of the things that we are planning at the state library to help, and some of the resources that we've already created for you. So plan on attending or watching one of the recordings. There's already the recording from the webinar on Wednesday this week is already posted, so contact me if you need that link. And then we're also looking for a couple of folks who might be interested in taking an online course with Amelia and I, and that's the From Compassion to Action. It's a 2-module course. It's not Compassion to Action 2. It's a 2-module course. Should have put a dash or something between there, or comma, online. And you take the course, the actual modules, on your own time. They probably take between, I was looking at them yesterday, between an hour and 2 hours to complete. There's several videos, some reading to do, some reflection. And then we set up a meeting of the cohort so we can all get together and discuss each module. So we're planning to do this either December, January, or January, February, 1 module per month. It'll be about 7 credits in library services to the public altogether. That's also completely eligible for OPI credit. You'll get can get 7 credits from OPI if that's something you want. So this is really an interesting topic. It's all about kind of the mental health crisis that's kind of going on in many of our communities and how that's impacting library services. So our friends at Info People in California put the 2 modules together and asked us if we'd consider running it as a cohort, because we've been doing cohorts in the past and they'd heard about that and they were interested to see how that would work. So that's coming up, and the times that we meet will be determined based on who's in the cohort and when we can all get together. So if you want more information about that, email me and I'll be happy to get you signed up for it and point you to the courses online. So that's what we have planned in the next couple months for training. And Suzanne, I'm going to turn everything on over to you.
Okay.
I'll keep an eye on the chat box so you don't have to worry about that, and take it away.
I was asked to talk a little bit about the broadband toolkit, and I see, looking at the attendees who are here live, most of you are from public libraries and you participated in this. So perhaps you're curious about what we've been doing with your data and what we're planning on doing with your data. And so I thought I'd share a little bit with our first attempt at analyzing and sharing a little bit of this data came at recent SHLB conference in Washington, D.C. SHLB stands for Schools, Health, Libraries, Broadband Coalition, and Jennie is really active in that, and she suggested that I submit a proposal to SHLB, and so I did, and they put me on a digital inclusion panel. So it was interesting. I got to hear about what South Carolina is doing in digital inclusion, and also got to talk about our project a little bit. And I'm not going to go, well, I'll regale you with some of the slides I had here, but part of it was an introduction to Montana for people who are all over the country who don't necessarily understand our state and the scope of it, and to wow them a little bit with some of the mapping that we get from our GIS component in the state library, because I had a number of colleagues who were there who were also state E-rate coordinators, and none of them have GIS components in their library, so they were always quite envious of what we could do with mapping. But it's kind of fun when you're doing a conference like that and you have like half the audience of people that you already know who are there to support you, so it always makes it easier. And part of the inspiration for this is, just how bad our broadband is. And I think many of you know this intuitively, but it kind of hurts to see it in facts. From August 2018, they ranked us as having the worst broadband coverage among US states at 69.2%. And this is talking, I believe this is talking about it as FCC's standard of broadband, which is 25 megabits download and 3 up. And so only 69% of us have access to the internet at those speeds. And they said that we also have the worst average internet speed among US states at 20.3 megabits. So we used to be, we've been down at the bottom for as long as I can remember, but we used to have like Alaska and Mississippi down below us, and now we're down below that. And I had a colleague from Alaska there, and she said, well, we're over reporting, so she wasn't necessarily sure this is true, but anyway, still, Alaska is better than us still.
And Mississippi, ugh,
yeah, I know,
that is very depressing.
It hurts. But so I showed them, just how big how big our state is, and this map particularly struck me because just a few days before we'd had the Ripple conference in Billings, and I know some of you were there, and we had the state librarian from Delaware there, and she'd been talking about a lot of the things that we're doing in Delaware, and at my table we were a little bit curious at one point of, well, just how does Delaware compare in size to Montana? And so I found this map that showed how Delaware compares in size. So, and this always comes up as an issue when we're talking with other states, that all states have rural, but rural in a state like Delaware or Connecticut is different because it's like the next library is like 10 or 20 miles away instead of 80 miles away, and and then I showed our topography, so we have all these pesky mountains that get in the way, our population density, that there aren't very many people, the reservations that are notoriously underserved, and the poverty rates, the percentage of families below the poverty level, with the darkest showing the highest poverty levels, and and also not surprisingly, perhaps a lot of those tend to coincide with the tribal areas where the tribal nations are, but so it all kind of puts together and it starts to make sense as to why we have some challenges with providing adequate broadband across our state. And so, of course, once we heard about the Toward Gigabit Libraries Toolkit, which came out several years ago, and we were interested in using it to try to find out exactly where all of our libraries were, so we could get some kind of a handle on, what kinds of broadband you guys had, what kinds of support you had or didn't have, what kinds of connectivity, how old your equipment was, a lot of that. But as you went through, with Chad, when I first looked at this, it's like, okay, this is really good. It's really in depth, but I think it's going to be a challenge for a lot of our librarians to do this on their own. And it would take a lot of time. It would have taken a lot of time for, Pam and me and Tracy and, anybody else to go out and work with you on it. So it worked out really well that we could hire Chad's firm as a consultant to go around and work with all the libraries. And so, he went to all the libraries and branches in the state and collected data. And I believe he got everything but, so there were 117 libraries and branches, and he collected from 114, I think it was. And I may be off by a little bit at this point because I don't have my notes right in front of me. But the only ones that he didn't get data from there was one branch that didn't have internet. There was another branch that a couple of branches were in schools, and so there were some issues with the schools working with the school IT wouldn't give him the information because they didn't know what this was about, and one of them didn't even have a branch librarian at the time, so there was nobody to contact. Of course, we were doing this in the summer and there was nobody to contact, but overall, I think really good coverage. He traveled the state, and and I think everyone that I talked with who worked with him thought that he was good to work with. So that was great. That was a success. Other information that we were trying to get kind of in conjunction with this, but separately, is it's really tough to determine exactly what the ISPs are offering, what's out there and what they're offering and at what price. And so this is a map from the Montana Telecommunications Association, that shows their members, the areas that they cover, and fiber. And I can't remember the timeline on this. I think this is from like last year, but you can see the dark red lines are what they call the internet backbone that runs through the state. So it connects, it connects us with everybody else. And the dark red nodes are, connection points and hubs, whatever. I don't recall what the exact terminology for that was. And then the little red lines are fiber connections that kind of build outs that the ISPs have made. So, everything, has to come from the backbone. You need to connect to that to get out, and then, it kind of branches out. So, you can see there's a lot of fiber kind of crisscrossing around the state in various places. And there's a lot of different telecom providers, ISPs. They're not differentiated on here. The dark blue ones are what didn't come out when I, made this slide. The dark blue ones are MTA members. That light purple one is Mid Rivers, which is rural telco co-op, but not a member of MTA. And the darker purple is CenturyLink, I believe, CenturyLink's coverage. And so there's some places where it kind of goes over. So, we tried to contact them and get information from them as well on what they had to offer and prices, and with mixed results. When we actually looked at the data, and I started looking at it a little bit to try to draw some conclusions that I could share, or at least some findings with where we were at. I looked first of all at the types of connectivity that you guys reported in the libraries, and could see that the DSL and fiber is roughly equal, 36%, a little over a third. Fiber, that's good, that over a third have access to that. That over a third is still on DSL is not so good. As far as the desirable connectivity, and I just finished a book on fiber that was really interesting and very distressing as far as where the US is at a whole. Fiber is the top of the line as far as broadband connectivity, because that gives you the ability to expand, potentially keeping up with whatever the current demands are, up to, past 25 megabits to 100, which is actually where libraries should be according to the FCC, on up to 500, on up to a gig, on up to 10 gigs, whatever is needed in the foreseeable future. And it will keep increasing. That's one thing we know. Cable is the second tier on that. That's the second best that you can have. So you can see 16% of our libraries are at second tier, which, once again, not bad. DSL is internet that's running over old copper lines that the telcos largely run and maintain. And depending on the age of these copper lines, these could be largely the copper lines that were laid as part of the telephone, getting rural telephone coverage out to communities, following the Depression. So not great, and probably not going to be improved very much over where they're at now. I mean, there's ways to improve that a little bit, but that's definitely third tier on that. And then we have 12% that are satellite and other. And other was largely people who didn't report what it was, so I don't really know. And a lot of wireless. And I'm not quite sure I understand what wireless is. I know some libraries had microwave connections. Some of them may be getting kind of a radio bandwidth kind of thing, but I wasn't really clear on what that was. But so you can kind of see where we're at. It could be much better. I was just looking at what some of my colleagues in other states were reporting, like Kentucky, I think, is reporting like 75% of their libraries have fiber. So yeah, we could be doing better in that area. Some other data that I pulled out of there fairly quickly before the conference was the average tested download speed, and these were the ones that Chad did while he was there. And the reason there's two different ones is because he used two different tests. Oh, good. There go the dogs. My mail may be arriving, or perhaps someone's walking down the street. It's hard to know what the catastrophe is that they're trying to save me from.
They are just putting in their 2 cents worth for beating Mississippi the next time we do this.
Yeah. I gave them something to chew on, but apparently whatever's out there is more interesting than that. Anyway, so the average tested download speeds, according to these two different reporting tools, were 18 and 28. And I wanted to point out that these are actually kind of skewed results, because Bark if you want broadband. Thanks, Ann. Yes, they're commenting on how sad this truly is, but
Yeah, and for those of you listening and can't see the chat box, if you're listening to the recording, Ann Eubank just said bark if you want great broadband. So thank you, Ann, for a bit of levity.
and like I was saying, the 1828 is actually kind of skewed higher because we have quite a range in reported speeds. It goes from less than 1 megabit on one test that was given to 907, and the 907 was at the community college, which is a community college branch library at MSU Billings, which has a gig connection. So they kind of skewed that higher on there. So you can see we're definitely on the low side as far as the download speeds. The good news on that, if you want to find some good news, is that the average cost per month was $122. So we may not be getting much, but we're not paying much either. So we're not paying much for the bandwidth we're not getting. Yay. Another thing that I pulled out of there was that over half of the libraries aren't filtering any of their internet connections now. And some of the questions, as you may recall from the survey, had to do with E-rate. And so the cost, I think, the objections to filtering and other issues lead into the fact that only 15% of libraries are currently applying for E-rate. And so, why is that an issue? Well, E-rate is still really the only game in town as far as helping to pay for bandwidth and helping to pay for broadband. So, people aren't, taking advantage of that. Now, I kind of had a theory for some time on, that people weren't, too concerned about their lack of bandwidth because, the expectations were low. That, people, that we were just kind of fulfilling low expectations. That, patrons would come in and maybe, try to do something and not be able to do it. So they figure, well, okay, well, I'll just check my email and that works fine. So, we're happy with that. And, and things just kind of go along with that. But, I discovered when I was looking at the responses that you guys really do understand very well what you're missing out on by not having adequate bandwidth, because what most of the people said was that, they were largely missing out on video conferencing opportunities and the kinds of ones, that had to do with distance learning, with job interviews, with people being able to, Skype with loved ones in various parts of the country or overseas, that all of these things are difficult with existing connections. So yeah, augmented virtual reality, all of that kind of stuff. These things are all going to be difficult for us to really take part in our communities with the bandwidth, where it is right now. Streaming video, and especially as streaming video gets, as you're noticing, it keeps increasing. It moved from high definition to 4K to 5K, and all of this, it's just going to be taking more and more all the time. So what are the next steps on here? Well, a few months ago, we were contacted by Simmons University, one of the professors there, who was interested in having a look at our data and doing an analysis and study. And so some of the things that we asked them to help us work with them on and perhaps do a report for us was, the libraries that are the worst off, so that we could help prioritize investment and kind of help boost, those who, who have the greatest need. And also look at what options or low-hanging fruit might exist to help us address concerns most quickly, and what data are available that might compel investment to solve the problem. One of the things that I've discovered, once again from talking to other states, is that most of the states that have done, because there are other states that have similar challenges, like Arizona also is a large rural state with challenging topography, a large Native American population. But Arizona the state has invested a lot. So like with E-rate, a number of their libraries have, done fiber construction projects, and the state has helped match the funds on those, or they've helped make up for what E-rate doesn't cover, so that it would be affordable for the communities. Because for a lot of us, if we're talking about a several $million project, even if you do get E-rate to pay for 80% of that, take for my math skills, let's say it's going to cost you $1 million to run fiber from wherever it is at the school to your library. And E-rate's willing to pay for 80% of that. You still have to come up with $200,000. Well, I don't know a whole lot of libraries have $200,000 lying around. So having the state be willing to step in and help with those investments really helps. And so we're hoping, if we can come up with a good report and make a compelling argument, that maybe eventually we can get the state to fund some of these projects and to help with it, and actually make a move on it. And also with the aging equipment, we know that a lot of the equipment that you guys are using is BTOP era equipment, which is now going on 10 years old. And not only does it need to be replaced for age, but as we do increase bandwidth, you need generally new routers. You need both wired and wireless, and new modems, and you need a lot of new equipment to actually take advantage of the better bandwidth coming in. And so we might be able to find money that is available somewhere, to help with some equipment upgrades, if we know actually what the needs are and can make a case in that way. So, I think it will be very helpful to have Simmons working with us. And I got to meet with a couple of the research assistants who were at SHLB. The professor wasn't there, but a couple of the research assistants came to the session, and I talked to them afterwards. And we're going to talk again on Tuesday, kind of with where they're at and what our needs are. And and I've been looking at the data a little bit more, and I can show you kind of what the spreadsheet looks like as well, because I managed to
just mention that Ann Eubank joined us, and she was in DC to talk to our congressional delegation and use some of the data that we'd collected. So, okay, if I get Ann in here now, or do you want to talk more about
you can get Ann in too.
Okay.
Some of the other things I was looking at that I thought were kind of interesting was like the reliability of the internet connections. And so I was kind of interested to see, and I was trying to make some little charts to add in. Of course, all of a sudden I can't do charts in Excel anymore. But as you can see from this, most of the people are rating them as dependable, very dependable, mostly reliable. So that's good news. Only one ranked it as not reliable, that they had outages frequently, like perhaps even one a day, and sometimes dependable with outages maybe once a week. So once again, we may not be paying a lot for it, but at least, at least it seems fairly good on that respect. And some things that I would really be interested in following up on a little bit more is some of the, like with all those fiber connections, what are the speeds people are getting with fiber connections, and what are the possibilities with that? Because that seems to me like some low-hanging fruit. If you have, if you truly have fiber to your library, and I'm beginning to doubt if that's really the case, because providers seem to have some kind of weird definitions about what providing fiber actually is. But if you actually do have fiber to the library, then you should have the capability of having much more options than people are currently taking advantage of. So it'll be interesting. But so I'm ready for any questions, and be interested to hear what Anne has to say on the subject too.
So Anne, why don't you give us a kind of update from your experience with the congressional delegation having this discussion?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for letting me pop into your presentation, Suzanne. I really appreciate it. But so just a little bit of background. So I work through ALA on a group called the Policy Corps. And so since 2018, I've been getting trained on all sorts of issues in terms of what's important for libraries across the country, and also advocacy and media training, things like that. And as a result of being in this program, I've had to choose a focus area. And so I chose my focus area to be rural broadband. It not only is it a Montana issue, it's a national issue, and because of my interest in K-12 school libraries as well, in our rural areas, schools and libraries will often share the same connection. So I've been working pretty diligently on first understanding the landscape of rural broadband, because I'm an end user and not necessarily a techie, so it's been really illuminating. So I was connected with the Internet 2 group through ALA, and Jennie and former IMLS director Susan Hildreth and I presented at their retreat, their summer retreat in Bozeman. And so we talked about Gigabit Toolkit. We talked about some of the opportunities that we see, some places where we could see some vast improvement, and really just have embarked on this relationship of, just figuring out how we can collaborate together to our mutual benefits in our organizations. So as a result, I was asked to participate on the Internet 2's Global Summit Planning Committee. And then I have also been working with some of their staff to better understand the services that they provide. So all of that being said, the congressional delegation, when I was in Washington, I met with all of the staffers who have broadband in their portfolio, and I specifically talked about the Gigabit Toolkit study that Montana is conducting currently, and all three staffers are very, very interested in the results. And as you probably know, our congressional delegation, all three of them come together in agreement on this issue of rural broadband. And so the other thing that I shared with them is this, and Suzanne, you talked about it a bit, was this notion of the underreporting of data, or underreporting of broadband connectivity through the FCC, and it simply has to do with the way that the FCC is mandated to collect the data. So it's collected by census tracts, and so if there's one good connection, like if there's one rancher, you know, in near Circle or something, and they have a fiber connection, and that rancher, you know, anybody who lives in that census tract is going to be reported as having that broadband, and that's an issue. And so what I heard at the Internet 2 Committee Summit was that the FCC is over-reporting by 62 million Americans. And I think that was the remarks, Suzanne, you were at SHLB, so it was Commissioner Stark's remarks that I'm referring to, FCC Commissioner Stark's remarks. So I brought that up, and I was like, this is a huge issue. And to my, I was just very pleased to hear that all three congressional offices know about the issue. They are all in support of the fix, and they hope to get the fix passed through Congress by the end of the year. Obviously, there's a lot going on in Washington right now, so that's a big if, but I was just really, really pleased to hear that our congressional delegation not only is interested in the connectivity of our public libraries throughout Montana, as demonstrated by the upcoming Gigabit Toolkit study in Montana, as well as addressing the over-reporting of broadband availability issue in Montana. So that's what I got.
Thanks, Ann. And yeah, I've been trying to understand a lot of those kind of reporting things too, and I've seen a number of different tools. SHLB has webinars every now and then, and they have people coming on and explaining these things. You know, so our service providers have gotten a lot of money from the government for build outs in various ways, and
they don't do those build outs out of the goodness of their little,
no, they don't.
Cotton picking.
Oh no, they do not.
No, they definitely get, and they get paid up front a lot of times too. So that's,
and so when I look at those and go, okay, let's see, who got this, where, and for how much. A lot of the build outs have been for one of the things that surprised me was all the money that went to 10 down, 1 upload build outs, and which that isn't even broadband by anybody's scope of the imagination, and yet they can say that they've made an improvement, that they're they've gotten money, they've made an improvement in this area, and possibly keep others from coming in and getting additional money to better serve that area by doing that. So they're kind of keeping us in this forced backward poverty in some ways, broadband poverty. And then there's all kinds of other little tricks, like Ann said about the if one and it would be nice if the rancher near Circle were served, but probably even more likely for Circle, since that's kind of the headquarters of Mid Rivers, that yes, they do have a fiber connection there at the headquarters in Mid Rivers, and serving someone else in the community, and so then they can say that the entire area around them in Macomb County is served by fiber, which is really unfair as far as that goes. And I recently heard about this other fascinating little trick from Renee Goss that some of you will remember, who retired. She used to be the library director in Sydney. She now lives in a subdivision in Billings, and she was told that fiber was coming to her neighborhood in that subdivision. So she was excited. It's like, oh, great, fiber. So when is it going to come to our house? And she was told, well, it isn't going to come to our house. It's on a post out in her neighborhood, and they'll be using the existing wiring to hook up to the fiber. Well, fiber is only good as the, they call the last mile. And so, that existing wiring hooking up to the pole means she's going to have existing wiring DSL speed instead of fiber. So, the tricks are just amazing on this. And I'm becoming very cynical, but I'm starting to understand more and more of it.
That's like hooking a water main into a garden hose. I mean,
yeah.
Or even worse,
exactly.
a straw, because whatever that last bit of pipeline is what that user
will determine what you're getting. Yeah.
So
that's a little bit, a choke point, and that kind of thing is very distressing. One of the things they talked about a lot at SHLB was self-provisioned building, and that's what a lot of communities are doing. And they're building their own fiber and running it, and that's that's an expensive option, but it's one that guarantees that you have service and you have control over the service. And the ISPs and the providers hate that. They really hate it. I've been to MTA conferences before, and oh boy, do they hate it when you start talking about that. But if we had a state broadband coordinator, which we don't in Montana, it's the kind of thing that I think would be interesting to talk about and to look at in more detail. Communities looking at doing their own on that, and looking for funding on that while it's available. But anyway, so any other questions or things people are interested in from the data, things they were curious about that might be able to give quick answers on?
It's a really important topic, and I didn't realize that Montana had fallen to the bottom of the heap. I knew we were down there, but that's kind of depressing way to end the week. Thanks, Suzanne. But I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box, but anyone's welcome to unmute your microphone, get in here. In terms of the big thing is, once you have data like this now, certainly I assume state will be looking for opportunities to improve this situation with libraries and around our state. So for those of you who participated and spent time with Chad, thank you, because this is good information. Is there any place people can go to just is there a written report or something that
the written report will be when Simmons comes up with it.
So we're letting the university, you have an ETA or expectation of when that might be, like next summer or next spring?
I think we were looking at spring on that, spring, early summer, but I'll know more about that after we talk in next week. And unfortunately, I missed out on the first call because I was on the road, and so I didn't get to participate in it, but I will be available for when we talk on Tuesday. So,
well, we do know this is a very important topic to our state librarian and in our state, and as Anne has confirmed, with our congressional delegation. So hopefully we'll start to see some movement up, and maybe something similar to a second kind of BTOP activity across the state with equipment and new service coming to libraries. So, was the library that didn't have internet service, would that be my branch library in East Glacier? I know we don't, but
no,
because I think we're kind of considered a quasi branch because we don't have any paid staff at all. So
no, as I recall, and I may be getting this wrong, I think it was one of the Butte Silverbow branches. There may have been another one too, but I believe it was one of the the one in the mall or something like that. There was one that would be
understandable considering.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording today, and thank you for tuning in for this update. Thank you, Suzanne, for being willing to step in without our state librarian here today, and thanks, Anne, for giving us an update from DC and for all the work that you're doing on this, representing us as well. So that's it for today. Everything you ever wanted to know and all the bad news on broadband.
Hey, we can only go up from here, so you know.
That's right.
Exactly.
Optimism.
There's going to be tremendous.
When you're at the bottom, you can only go up.
Exactly. Thanks, you guys.